Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
And always great to have with us live on our Newsmaker line, Alfred University history professor, Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, thank you for calling in.
Well, it's a pleasure as always, Brian. It's a cold day, and tomorrow's going to be a colder day, so I'm inside, not outside talking on my cell phone here.
I hear you. Is it icy where you are this morning, Gary?
A little bit. I'm in Wlea right now, and it's, kind of similar to, I'm sure, Hornell, Alfred. It's okay. I can't complain about the weather. I think that anyone up here in this area who complains about the weather should not be living in this area.
Well, Dr. Ostrower, lots going on in the news. The Taliban and the U.S. may have worked out a possible agreement to pull U.S. troops out of Afghanistan.
Well, yesterday we heard that an agreement, a tentative agreement, has been reached. Now, I'm not quite sure what that means, because often when you say a tentative agreement has been reached, it does not include details. And as we often say, the devil is in the details. However, the U.S. has been in Afghanistan now for approximately 18 years. We arrived there in a military fashion back in November of 2001. It's been certainly the longest war that we have ever fought. We've suffered about 3,000 killed in action. In other words, there's been some real pain for a lot of families. In respect to that, there are many men who have served multiple tours in Afghanistan. One of my own colleagues at Alfred University, who teaches European history, is an Afghanistan vet, and has told me some very, very interesting stuff about the difficulties, about the complexities of that war. I think that, Americans do not understand it. Many of us have kind of ignored it. Once upon a time, a war monopolized all of our attention, as it did during, let's say, the Second World War. With Afghanistan, I think there's a tendency to do just the opposite, to somehow just pretend that it doesn't exist. But it certainly has existed, and I think that many Americans are, quite, happy to hear that we may be pulling out. My own take on that is a little bit different. I'm not so sure we should be completely pulling out. We don't have very many troops there, but the fact of the matter is that because we do have troops there, we are supporting in a rather important way the Afghani government, the legitimate Afghani government. And if we pull out, I expect that the Taliban are going to take over the entire country as they had before 2001. I think they'll take over the entire country, and we don't know what's going to happen if that occurs. Up in 2001, the Taliban allowed Al-Qaeda to establish 6 major bases, training bases there. What happened on 9/11 in 2001 came out of those training bases. Will that happen again? Well, we're told the agreement includes a promise on the part of the Taliban that they will not allow the return of Al-Qaeda or of ISIS or of any other, non-state group. Is that true? Will they, in fact, abide by that agreement? Yours truly has absolutely no confidence that they will. In other words, I think that once we're out, all bets are off. And I think there's another complication from my perspective. We know what the situation of Afghani women were. That's 50% of the population before 2001. Under Taliban rule, women were not, I'm talking about adult women, were not allowed out of their homes without a male escort. They were not permitted to work outside of the home. They were not permitted to receive an education. They had no education, so many of these women were, quite illiterate, and they remain so. That has changed dramatically since 2001, once the Taliban were eliminated from, their governmental positions, from controlling the government, after about 6 or 8 or 10 weeks of warfare or whatever. Well, God forbid what's going to happen to Afghani women once the Taliban once again take over Afghanistan. And I think that no one understands this better than Afghani women, number one, and secondly, the legitimate government under a fellow by the name of Ghani. the Americans have negotiated with the Taliban without the presence, outside of the presence of the legitimate government. And you might ask yourself, what kind of a lesson, what kind of a message are we sending to the legitimate government? What we're essentially saying is that we don't respect you, we're not going to take you seriously, and you are not going to interfere with our plans.
Why do you think the State Department did that, Gary?
Because I think they had no choice. I think the Taliban were essentially saying, and have said for a long, long time, that we will not recognize the legitimate government of Afghanistan. In much the same way during the Vietnam War, that the North Vietnamese would not allow the South Vietnamese government to appear at the negotiating table.
Talking to Dr. Gary Ostrower live this morning, Senator Kamala Harris is running for president. And Senator Kirsten Gillibrand also announced there's a few that have. Let's start out with your thoughts on Senator Harris running for president.
Don't know very much about her. You know, she was the Attorney General of California. She made some enemies on the left when she was Attorney General. She's now making some enemies on the right. She's clearly a liberal. But when it comes to law and order issues, I think we're going to find her to be rather strict. I think that a lot of conservatives are going to find her a lot more attractive than they do up to this point. She opened up her campaign this weekend in Oakland. She had a huge crowd there. I think it was at least 20,000 people showed up for her opening, and that's pretty impressive. And she gave a speech in which she essentially said her theme was, "We are better than we are right now." Okay, we're better than this, and I think that that theme is going to pull her campaign together in a way perhaps that Hillary Clinton was never able to really establish a single theme back in 2016. Does that make Harris a more credible candidate, a more likely winner, so to speak? That is, someone who's going to get the nomination and then maybe even win the election? Yeah, maybe it does. But a lot of water is going to run under this bridge. There are many, many other candidates, so I think we're just going to have to wait and see. For me, not knowing all that much about Harris, I'd have to say the jury is way, way, way out. It's going to be a long time before it comes in on her.
Senator Gillibrand said yesterday that she will not take any PAC, Political Action Committee money. What do you think that does for her campaign, Gary?
It's hard to say. I mean, she's going to bank on, and I mean literally bank on, relatively small campaigns, the way in which Bernie Sanders ran back in 2016. To be honest, I just don't take Senator Gillibrand all that seriously. I don't think she's going to be a very serious candidate. I don't think she's going to get the nomination. She's a one-issue candidate. That issue has been, at least up to this point, the issue of women, of treatment of women, of women's rights and whatnot. And I think that's not enough to structure an entire campaign around. On the other hand, I think that there was a very interesting development this weekend, really just yesterday, and that is that Howard Schultz, who is the CEO of Starbucks, he announced that he would run for president. Now, he's made some noises about this for a while. What he's doing is setting up this so-called exploratory committee. So he's not absolutely committed to running, but it's likely that he will. And he's going to run not as a Democrat, he's going to run as an independent. And what he's essentially saying is that both parties are corrupt, that neither party is really addressing the most important interests of the American public. That Trump, of course, is corrupt. That Trump is an autocrat. That Trump is not fit to be president. But he's also saying that the Democrats are not really addressing the needs of the American working class. And he's arguing that we need a centrist rather than a left, rather than a right politician. We need someone who's going to run in the traditional center, and he's that person. The fact of the matter is that historically, third-party candidates have simply not done very well. And I would expect that Mr. Schultz is not going to do very well. So, if he wants to run, he's a billionaire. If he wants to split half of his fortune into his campaign, we're going to hear a lot from him. But I just don't think that he's going to become president of the United States. Now, the really interesting thing is that there are many Democrats who are calling on this guy to, simply step out, not to run at all.
Because they're afraid of the Perot effect.
Yeah, absolutely. In other words, what they're fearful is that he's going to split the Democratic vote and allow Trump to be reelected in 2020. That may not happen either. I mean, I think, and I may be wrong on what I'm going to say right now, but my hunch is that what Schultz is counting on is that there are many, many Republicans who are really not very happy with Donald Trump. Okay? And while they cannot bring themselves to vote for a Democrat, they may express their displeasure not by simply not voting at all, but by voting for an independent, and therefore, he may receive a good deal more support than we realize. But if you want, I can talk a little bit about the actual effect of these third-party candidates going all the way back to Theodore Roosevelt.
Go right ahead, Gary.
He ran for president. Well, in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt, and remember, Roosevelt had already been president for 2 terms. Okay, in 1909, he stepped down. William Howard Taft became the president. Remember, Roosevelt was a Republican. Taft was handpicked by Roosevelt to run for president in 1909. The two men were friends. Taft had been, somewhat earlier, Roosevelt's Secretary of War. In other words, he was clearly a member of the Roosevelt team. But Roosevelt soured on Taft. He felt that he wasn't progressive enough. Roosevelt considered himself to be a progressive, supporting things like unemployment compensation legislation and direct primaries for running and whatnot. In any case, Roosevelt in 1912 decided that he would run again. The Democratic candidate was a fellow by the name of a former president of Princeton University and a governor of New Jersey named Woodrow Wilson. Well, the expectation was that if it was a straight Taft-Wilson contest, Taft probably would have won. Okay, Republicans had a good deal of support in the country nationally, but Teddy Roosevelt's candidacy meant that the Republican vote was split between the conservative section of the Republican Party that voted for Taft, the somewhat more progressive section of the Republican Party that voted for Roosevelt, and as a result, Woodrow Wilson, not getting a majority of the popular vote, but getting a minority, about 40%, Woodrow Wilson became president of the United States. And that kind of thing has happened more than once. In 1948, Harry Truman was running against the governor of New York, a man by the name of Thomas Dewey. And there was a third-party candidate. His name was Henry Wallace. He was far to the left of Harry Truman, and the many Democrats feared that Henry Wallace would draw enough Democratic votes to essentially elect the Republican Tom Dewey. That didn't happen, but it almost did happen. As a matter of fact, on election night, most people still thought that Dewey had probably won the election. Well, Truman won, and he won, just by a very, very, very narrow margin. But here again, you have the effect of a candidate on the political left splitting the Democratic vote and almost electing a Republican. Ross Perot in 1992. Ross Perot may have helped to elect Bill Clinton. It was hard to say. When I say hard to say, because Ross Perot got about 19% of the vote, but about half of Ross Perot's support came from Republicans, and about half came from Democrats. And under those conditions, one might argue that, maybe he really didn't affect the election very much at all. But certainly the Democrats are worried about Schultz. And you're going to hear, I think, a lot of criticism of Schultz, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on Schultz to withdraw. And some of that pressure may take the form of saying, all right, if you withdraw from the election, we will appoint you as Secretary of Commerce or something along those lines in the event that the Democrats should win the election in 2020.
That's very interesting. We're late on a break. We're going to take one now. Back in just a moment with Dr. Gary Ostrower.
Davidson's Furniture.
It's Furniture Bowl week at Davidson's Furniture. Hi, this is Mike Davidson, and I've taken huge discounts on Super Serta mattresses made in Jamestown, New York. Super recliner sale pricing on Best and Lazy Boy recliners, starting at only $298. All sofas and sectionals that are in stock or custom order are super sale priced. Use your tax return or convenient 0% financing is available. We're open 7 days a week and provide quick professional delivery. Don't miss the Furniture Bowl sale going on now at Davidson's Furniture.
Meteorologist Rob Carolyn on the line. Rob, are we going to have as cold a Wednesday as everybody's been saying?
Oh, yes, we are, Brian, and it's going to be even colder for Wednesday night and into Thursday. Some of that Arctic air that's producing temperatures in the range of 20 to 25 below this morning across North Dakota. Little piece of it's headed our way. Fortunately, we won't be as cold as they will be in the Dakotas and Minnesota, but we're going to be pretty chilly as we head towards the middle and latter portion of the work week. Good news is the cold air is not going to last very long. Temperatures will start to moderate a bit Friday and through the weekend. Today, a lot of cloudiness. May see a few flurries or a snow shower. Temperatures up to about 30 to 35. There's the potential for up to an inch of snowfall in those areas that see persistent snow showers today. Sunrise this morning was at 7:26. Sunset tonight at 5:21. Clouds tonight, a couple of flurries and snow showers around. Cold, 0 to 5 above overnight. Tomorrow we'll see clouds, some breaks of sun. It's breezy with a chance of a flurry. Very cold tomorrow, highs 5 to 10 above. Tomorrow night, we're going to be partly to mostly cloudy, breezy with a chance of some flurries or snow showers, a low near 5 below. Cloudy, breezy with a few flurries on Thursday, and a high of 5 to 10 above, Brian.
Thank you, Rob. Back with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Before the break, we were talking about the effect of third-party candidates on the races, political races. Dr. Ostrower, I think Governor Andrew Cuomo might be benefiting from these third parties. I think that Cuomo is not just running against GOP candidates when he seeks re-election, but he's got Cynthia Nixon, Larry Sharp on the Libertarians front, Howie Hawkins on the Green Party. I think that kind of helps Cuomo.
Well, it may very well help Cuomo. It's again, as I said before, it's kind of hard to judge this, well in advance of an election. But, I was thinking during the break that the real reason, perhaps the most important single reason why so many Democrats are fearful that Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, is going to split the Democratic vote in 2020 has to do with what happened in the year 2000 when Ralph Nader ran as a third-party candidate. And while Nader only received about 3% of the vote, he got enough votes, I think if I'm not mistaken, 75,000 or 80,000 votes in Florida to tip the election from Al Gore, who was a Democratic candidate, to George W. Bush. Bush won the Florida electoral vote, and as a result of that, he won the election. And it wasn't only what happened with Ralph Nader in 2000. What happened in 2016 in the state of Wisconsin was that Jill Stein, who, and I may be wrong on this, but I think she only received about 1 to 2% of the total vote as a third-party candidate, but she took just enough votes away in Wisconsin to tip the election there from the Democrat Hillary Clinton to President Trump. To Donald Trump. And as a result, Trump became the president of the United States. So it's not the total vote that really counts that they're fearful of. It's the vote in some very, very closely divided states. Will Cuomo benefit from that kind of thing? I think the answer is probably yes. I think your observation is very much on the mark.
This day in history, January 29th, let's pick 1861, Kansas enters the Union.
Well, there was a very, very interesting situation in Kansas leading up to 1861. Kansas had applied for statehood back in about 1854, 1855, really in 1854. And Congress passed what was called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was a very, very important piece of legislation that is ultimately going to become one of the reasons why we're going to wind up in a civil war in this country 7 years later. The Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed the public in Kansas, the people in Kansas, to decide whether or not, the voting public, to decide whether or not they wanted Kansas to be a slave state or they wanted it to be a free state. Now, there was also, a Nebraska component of that, and that really wasn't terribly important because everyone knew that Nebraska was going to become a free state. But the issue of slavery was a really, really important issue, and there had been a compromise, the Missouri Compromise. Some of our listeners may remember that from their high school days. The Missouri Compromise had said, all right, there'll only be slavery south of the southern border of Missouri. Well, what happened with the Kansas-Nebraska Act was that now Congress is saying, nope, we're going to allow slavery any place, in any state, where the public will adopt it, where the public will support it. Well, what happened was that by the following year, in order to influence the election, thousands and thousands of Missourians who were pro-slave were pouring into Kansas to take up residence. And by the same token, many abolitionists, many people who were anti-slavery, were doing the same thing, including, I might add, from Steuben County, New York, and from Allegheny County, New York, who were pouring into Kansas to take up residence in order to vote against the perpetuation of slavery. And the result was that in 1855 and into 1856, there was a literal civil war, an actual civil war in Kansas. Okay? We call it Bleeding Kansas. It was kind of a microcosm, kind of a small, how shall I put it, a kind of tiny example of what would happen in the rest of the country after 1861. Well, in fact, in 1861, the war began. Kansas came in as a free state, and kind of that was the end of that issue. But one better understand that that what was happening in the middle of the 1850s in Kansas became of truly national importance. That's where John Brown killed a whole family of pro-slave people. There were a number of raids by John Brown, and by the same token, the pro-slavery forces were killing individuals who were anti-slavery. It was a real civil war, and it was one of the less attractive moments in American political history.
Dr. Ostrower learned a lot this morning, especially about the Steuben and Allegheny County residents going to Kansas to vote on that issue. That's very interesting. Never heard that before.
Well, this area was how shall I put it? It was influenced very much by what was called the Second Great Awakening. It was a religious revival movement. There are a lot of evangelicals up in this area. And they were starting, among other things, new religions. And that included Mormonism. It included Seventh-day Adventists. Of course, many of the more traditional Protestant sects, and almost all of these people were very, very anti-slavery. At Alfred University, for instance, which was Seventh-day Baptist, okay, it was founded a little bit before, way back in 1807. Well, the university was founded in 1836, but the Seventh-day Baptists arrived in 1807. But they, too, that Seventh-day Baptist group was very, very anti-slavery. And one shouldn't be all that surprised that every single male member of the Alfred University graduating class in 1861 joined the Union Army to fight not only for the preservation of the Union, but also for the elimination of slavery.
Some fascinating local history there. Dr. Gary Ostrower, as always, great having you on.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you guys next week.